Good evening, welcome to Safe Guidance TV. I'm Ray Douglas, and today we have a guest, Colvin White. Colvin is someone who our paths have crossed for approximately maybe 2 decades now, all about everything to do with young people, safeguarding and prevention. Welcome to Safe Guidance TV, Colvin.
Welcome as well, Raymond. Thank you for inviting me on this afternoon, or this evening, I should say. Hopefully I can share some of my experience, and people will be able to sort of get something from what my experience, or even sort of realize some of the things they're doing, or understand about the process or the issues around prevent is exactly what should be done. Yeah.
Excellent. So, Colvin, who is Colvin White?
Right. Well, I'm a 50-odd-year-old man, bit grey since COVID. Hoping to sort of look a bit younger afterwards, yeah. Born and bred in the UK. Parents are Caribbean heritage. I came up through 60s, 70s. If I sort of talk about my little journey onwards, grew up in an area where there was probably a lot of poverty, but there was a lot of love, a lot of communities gelling together, growing up, learning about each other's experience. And that's some of what I am. And then I, progressed through school as you do, and then I moved into the working world as I got older, and sort of had to sort of rely on some of my learned experience, learned skills, learned things to sort of take me through on that journey around some of the work I'm actually doing now.
Okay, excellent. So I'm thinking, while you're saying that, I'm thinking the first time I met you was an office just off Broad Street, I believe, in Birmingham.
That's right.
So what was your role? What was your role then?
Well, at that time, I was coordinating youth inclusion programs. Programs that work with young people, but are certainly, on the fringe of getting into crime. Young people sort of at risk of being sort of manipulated or coerced into all sorts of different behaviors, what would lead them into offending. And we used to work with people like yourself right at the time in terms of trying to provide positive role models, positive stimuli around trying to make them disengage from some of the activities, what was bringing them more closer to that criminal justice process.
Okay, interesting. So something you mentioned there was something that was really quite unique. So there was a whole initiative, as you said, around the pre-crime area, wasn't there?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Young people hadn't received a criminal record per se, but they were showing risk factors where, and then the local authority would step in and try and do some work with them to divert them.
Well, to be honest, right, it wasn't even that. The local authority would have been given a direction that they need to be reducing crime, reducing people's fear of crime. But at the same time, there was an emerging grassroots set of people coming up who were, I would say, part of the solution, right? Because they had, credential with young people. They had a better knowledge of what was actually going on around it. And I think at that time, we knew we had to do something better or something different. And you remember, this is in the height of, the Burgers and the Johnsons conflict in our streets. Birmingham seen as one of the most dangerous places to live at that time. So realistically, something had to be done, and something had to be done different. And I think the prevent projects at that time really had a good steer around that.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember it well. And there was something also around what you mentioned there about how communities were given almost a license and empowered to lead on some of these agendas.
Yes.
And right in 2020 now we see the whole conversations around a public health response to violence. But I think I mean, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think there needs to be more of a community-centered public health response, or do you think we're in a strong position at the moment? What's your opinion on it?
My opinion really is that we have to have a strong grassroots input into what needs to be done, because professionals in positions can't cater for the full latitude of what is out there and what needs to be dealt with. So what we have to look at, right, is where is familiars and where are I would say grassroots developed resources which can support the solution in terms of how to reduce violence. How do we sort of engage with communities in that thinking around, it impacts on my community today, and it stagnates the growth of my people and my community, as I say, at the same. So I think, and their approach can't be a top-down delivery. All right, then there's lots of models we've looked at, but we've got to have to look at our unique communities and how, they can contribute to the problem.
Exactly. And a city like Birmingham, for example, that within every 2-3 minutes, you can drive through a different community.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you're saying that the approach shouldn't be binary, but rather community.
Make a noise with your thing, please.
Not just community centered, but also culturally competent.
Yes. Sorry about that, Ray.
No problem. Listen, I've been delivering all over COVID online, and I've delivered to practitioners and their dogs sat next to them. I've had babies in hand. So the rules have changed.
All right. Okay then.
The rules have changed forever. Something you said though, that I mean, your journey. So you've been involved in and around early intervention and prevention.
Yeah.
So now you work for Birmingham's Children's Trust, right? For those who don't know what that is, for the communities out there listening to Safe Guidance TV today, what is Birmingham Community Trust?
Right, Birmingham Children's Trust, right, is a basically it's children's services in Birmingham. Before it used to be children's safeguarding. So before Birmingham City Council used to deliver child protection for all the vulnerable young people within Birmingham. About a year or so, or two, remember we was in special measures there in terms of inspectors coming and saying that we weren't that great at what we were doing. And as a result, we, senior management as well as councillors, they set up a trust. That gave us a bit more scope to sort of, how would I say, target, develop the service, to be more responsive to our communities and more responsive to the people in need. So the trust itself is sort of like an entity which is being, how would I say, it's been provided by the council but delivered by this organisation, which is Birmingham Children's Trust.
Yes, so, and apologies for calling it the Community Trust. So Birmingham Children's Trust. So now it's a kind of overarching, wider organisation that encapsulates a lot of the issues that young people face.
Absolutely. Well, it was always there in the council, but probably when we went into special measures, it gave us a time to sort of look at ourselves retrospectively, because sometimes you do a piece of work and you think you're doing it well, and then you get somebody with an independent eye to come and have a look and have a view, and then have a really good scope on what you're actually doing and provide advice and guidance on how we can improve. And I think that's the journey what we went through as safeguarding practitioners within children's services, which more or less developed into the beast what we call now the Birmingham Children's Trust.
Okay, so back to when I first met you, there wasn't a thing called social media back then.
Come on, man, we never had it.
No, I don't think we had social media. We definitely didn't have TikTok and Snapchat. So like myself, we've seen changes. We've seen changes over the last 2 decades. Birmingham is a very different place from when we first met, although I'm not sure if it's still getting the same labels that it is. I think What's your work primarily around now then? So what do you work around?
Now, I'm predominantly doing work around prevent, as in preventing radicalization and extremism, right? It became a very, very important piece of work, mainly because, the outcome of a terror attack or the outcome of somebody practicing extremism or radicalization could lead to significant harm or even death for some people. So I think the government, in its duty to certainly safeguard people as well as protect the public, had to sort of look at a strategy around that and how could we do that, as well as not, if I was to sort of go back a bit, Prevent hasn't had the best of labels. It hasn't had the best of journeys in terms of how it's impacted on some communities, but we still had to have something, or we still had to have a response to the potentials of individuals who are being drawn into a particular mindset or drawn into a particular viewpoint by individuals who, you know, their aim was clearly to change how society views particular issues. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, what has that allowed you to do? What's different from the work that you're doing now than to what you've always done? Because one of the things I have noticed is
Yeah.
that, whereas before you yourself were doing management, you're still doing that.
Yeah.
You actually at the coal face as well, aren't you? You're working with.
Yeah. Well, you know, I can't leave the coal face because, you
Of
know,
course.
I've always been there. I've always been there, you know.
And how does that feel though?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
being there frontline, working with communities on such a, and yes,
It's
definitely controversial,
yeah,
but
yeah,
also
yeah.
important issue.
I think what it is, right, it's you have to present, you know, you have to be presenting as honest and transparent. Because again, as I said, prevent is a very emotive subject. You know, some people feel that it was actually targeting them, right? I had to still present the work in how I do. I've always been there at the forefront of my career till now. Um, Preventing people from being drawn into things, drawn into, how would I say, criminal justice, being drawn into crime, being drawn into all sorts of difficult things. And I think the key around that was that I had a reputation before
Yeah.
for working with communities. Myself, when we talk, you asked me about myself at the very beginning. I'm a young black male. I grew up in Asian houses when I was a kid. You know what I'm saying? I've, 2 doors, 3 doors, every day, we all grew up together. So, my understanding of different communities probably is a little bit more developed than most,
Yeah.
simply because of my own lived experience. But at the same time, going into communities wasn't always going to be easy. It was through work with partners, you work with people like yourself, endorsing, not saying, openly endorsing, but certainly wanting to be part of the solution because we could see how it was impacting. Yeah.
Okay.
And
So let me ask you something then. So,
yeah.
I mean, obviously, non-disclosure and GDPR, but
Yeah.
can you share with us a time when you did a piece of work around this issue, preventing young people and community families from falling into extremism, that you thought to yourself, you knew it was important, but this is why you do the work that you do?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Many moons ago, we ran a project called Difference Never Applies. Yeah. We also done another project around
That's what you did there. That's DNA, right?
DNA. Yeah,
That's what you did there. All right, then. Okay.
yeah, right. So we had a set of young people from different communities.
Yeah.
I won't go into the detail of them, but you could say some were more politically inspired, some were more religiously inspired. Yeah.
Yeah.
When we brought them together and started to have that conversation around race, identity, belonging, it really come out and really born set up a set of new truths around what young people's perceptions were around that. It was good as me as a professional wanting to have a conversation, but the reality was that young people's perception of what those things are completely different to what I was thinking. So anyway, we ran these projects, right, and we certainly brought these young people together, and we carried out what we call the DNA screening. Before we actually done it, the young people were sort of giving us all this impression around what they disliked, from different communities, from different people, their perception of what, for instance, the prevent agenda, terrorism belongs to you, you're the cause of it, all that kind of thing. When we done the actual DNA program, and the young people started to look at their own heritage, a lot of the how would I say, grievances, or some of the anxiety, or some of the let's say main grievances what they were experiencing around particular communities was difficult to hold up to, simply because when you looked at your own DNA, it showed that you were probably part of that, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Another project I would say was really good was we done one about I would say war memorial, right? And this was really about looking at the heritage of what different communities contributed to the Second World War and the First World War. And there was a lot of young people in our city, which were anti-government, anti-establishment, didn't actually understand that their own foreparents played a contribution toward the freedoms they were living and experiencing now. So it kind of made me think to myself, right, that people started to develop in mindsets based on what their current environment is. But the reality is that they haven't had conversations of sense or seriousness to challenge some of the viewpoints what they were forming over a period of time. And I think this work in Prevent is really important in that sense.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because a lot of conversations been having at the moment around the refugee and migrant situation.
Yeah.
And I was training some social care workers a couple of weeks ago, and part of the icebreaker was what percentage of the UK are refugees. Some of them were saying up to 40%.
Yeah.
Like 26%.
Right. Yeah.
And these were like, social care practitioners, people who got experience, but their perception. And one thing I always say on Safe Guidance TV is, if you can get someone's attention, you can change their perception, which affects their reality.
Absolutely.
And one of the challenges over the lockdown and the conversations that I've been having that in all communities and local government, faith groups, you name it, is we know over the last 4 months, especially, young people are spending a lot more time online.
Oh yes.
And it's one of the biggest fears that not just grooming per se, but also what they're being exposed to. So your that journey of 2 decades now of working pre-crime, criminal justice, diverting young people away from the criminal justice system, right through to the whole area where there was a real dark period around gangs and serious youth violence in Birmingham, and now your work around kind of preventing young people from radicalization, extremism, and now in this era of the conversations around racial justice, what are the commonalities that you see?
Well, the commonalities around it, I can see that racism feeds some of these, developed stereotypes. We've seen it within the, movement around Black Lives Matter. We've seen a lot of people from different communities engaging within that struggle, but you still had people utilizing it as a process by which they can create division. Yeah. In my work, we've always challenged what were the seeds or what were the points of grievances, right? And if you think about it, somebody was following a white supremacist agenda or extreme far right agenda. A lot of the conversations around the issues what they are describing, it's based on built-up grievances and built-up hatred and some misinformation, right? When I look at the other set of young people who might be coerced or influenced around, I would say, religious extremism, you can see it's someone who's actually manipulated text, manipulated direction, manipulated individuals who are searching for truth. So you see, again, we have to provide in this day and age the essence of an opportunity for young people to talk about things, explore in, I would say, forums where we've got good individuals or good learned people to certainly have that conversation and open the debate with young people. So it's not all about what they've received through online feeds, because again, you sit down on YouTube, they can actually change your narrative through 3 or 4 videos. You could actually go there with a firm view and they can change your narrative with 3 or 4 videos.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because on the last show we had someone you might know called Ivan Humble, who was a former EDL regional organizer. And one of the things that he said was his first kind of entry into the EDL was based upon not just what he read in the papers, but also once he read what he read in the papers, he went to look for answers. So he went knocking on doors, people weren't giving him the answers. And his grievance started with, as you said, some of the monuments and some of the kind of issues around celebrating the people in the armed forces, and he felt that they were being disrespected. And I'm not sure, not to misquote him, but because he knew people personally who'd been involved, he felt disrespected. And it was only he kept knocking. The good thing about Ivan, he kept knocking on doors. So once he knocked on so many doors, he actually went to the Muslim community and got some of the stereotypes corrected that he held, the opinions that he held challenged. And today, you know what he's doing. So he's still working around make sure that all young people don't fall into it. But so one of the things you're saying is about vulnerabilities, and I know you've got a real a take on this. I'm gonna share something with the viewers. So in terms of vulnerabilities, do you want to go through some of this with us?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you're saying so is what we're saying then is in whether it be
Mhm.
crime, whether it be gangs, whether it be
Mhm.
racism, radicalization, right wing extremism, there's some commonalities. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, there's commonalities and there's all sorts of different risk factors around that. But in the world of radicalization, we certainly talk about political and religious groups can provide a sense of family. That's a given. It doesn't have to be a vulnerability, but it can lead to vulnerability, right?
Okay.
Um, a lot of times, I've always cited this. This isn't in today. One of the biggest vulnerabilities I always cite is poverty. People were living or enduring poverty. Your parents probably used to say, poverty is a sin. There's people who have always used that as a mantra as we were going through. But sometimes I think as professionals, we lose sight of what poverty is, because my poverty might be completely different to another person, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have the same impact. You understand me? Yeah.
Interesting.
Then we talk about like things like what triggers things. You could be an emotional struggle. It could be an emotional impact. It could be something. If you remember when a lot of brothers and sisters was leaving here to go to Syria. You remember we used to see on our news every night people being maimed, people being sort of armed, people weren't getting any medical treatment. And everybody was asking, when are the troops going to go there? When are the troops going to go there? To the point where people were actually getting up to go. But the issue was later on, it became a kind of a conclave for ISIL, and the government prescribed the region, so a lot of people out there ended up having to stay struggling.
And
And
am I right in
yeah,
saying about at least 900 people they're saying went from the UK, something like that?
yeah, absolutely. But at the end of the day, all of them people didn't go there to join ISIL. A lot of them went there under the notion that they wanted to go and do something good. If you think about what we were witnessing on a daily basis in terms of the drip feed of the type of violence what we're seeing on our TVs, bombs coming in at innocent bystanders,
Yeah.
right? So as I look through my sort of vulnerability matrix, if I could call it that,
Yeah.
sometimes we talk about the things where people think about the impact of it, but go back a second, Ray. Yeah, you move forward too fast, right?
Yeah.
When you go back there, you see. Sometimes you talk about that issue around identity. Sometimes
Yeah.
people don't think about how important that is, right, to a person growing up, trying to find their self in this world, or there's other things going on in their life, and they still need to know who they are, what they are, how they fit in. Yeah, and there's a lot of people, in that space where that notion of, am I a migrant? Am I an immigrant? Am I what? I know I was born here, but am I British? Am I not British? So there's a lot of issues around identity, right?
Interesting. And what if you're told, even though you're born
Yeah.
here, your parents may have been born, you're
It's
told you're not
still,
British?
come on, in this day and age, I had the very same comment. It's so weird, they talk about myself. I'll give you an experience down to yesterday. We had the same conversation. The way the system works, there's not a pecking order around migrants to say, well, actually, yeah, you're born here, so you're important to be here. Yeah.
Yeah.
The issue is that when you're faced with authority, you're seen as an immigrant or a migrant before anybody explores who you are and what you're doing here.
Mm.
And it's a weird scenario because you got some people who are born here would actually say to themselves, well, actually, I'm British. But getting to that line where you have to explain who you are and why you were and where you are, you start to feel that tone of anger. I thought I'd be treated differently being
Yeah.
born here. And
Yeah.
I had the same conversation with somebody about this yesterday. They find it very strange. But it's a reality what we are going through now, which probably a lot of us who have come up through the 60s and what have you would have thought things would be different.
So you're saying that there's definitely some similarities between
Yes.
some of the, because we people always quite often quote, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish.
Yeah.
People lived through it, not just quote it, lived through it.
Right.
Interesting.
Our parents did, yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, that overt racism, not covert, overt racism is something that, led to a lot, and only now when we understand about being trauma informed, probably a lot of the like the children of the diaspora from the Caribbean and people from South, I think it's just finishing, concluded recently, South Asian History Month, where people actually have started to look at their parents and think, hold on, were my parents traumatized through racial,
Thank you.
or
Thank you.
through racial
I didn't get
injustice?
it. I didn't get it.
No,
You know,
not at all.
yeah.
Not at all. Cool. So can I move on? Yeah.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, yeah.
So you'd say what, and this can be
This is a question I always ask people, because everybody always thinks that there is this thing, in my world of prevention, what social, what factors could someone become more susceptible or vulnerable to carrying out violent or criminal or terrorist act? What factors? Everybody else go like, what is the main thing? Because we hear on the news, somebody, oh, it's a revert,
yeah,
right? Or it's somebody with mental health,
yeah,
or it's somebody without mental health, or it's somebody there's always this everybody's looking for a factor, yeah.
yeah,
But if you move on, you'll see, right, that there is not one social, there's no research what consistently suggests that. But what
yeah,
we can see, though, there is a set of principles or factors that contribute to vulnerabilities, right? And if you think about it, right, you got things like your personal issues, um, an event or traumatic event, so anything could happen, for instance, it doesn't have to be related.
yeah,
It could just be, it gives you that cognitive opening for somebody who recognizes your trauma to come in there and start manipulating that situation and giving you advice around what you should be doing next, or make you become very, very vulnerable towards them as well. Another thing we look at, peer pressure. When I used to do work within gangs, it was crazy. Imagine you're working with young people and they're telling you that they can't go from brick to peck. This is like, a little bit of a gap between a road to one area, right?
yeah.
And
Brixton to Peckham. Yeah, this is when he was based in
yeah,
London, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you think to yourself, like, what's that about?
Mm.
What is that about? Your young people, we know that young people might have, little fisticuffs now and then. But and then that was all about young people having to rep and join up, and if you didn't, you were getting definitely getting wounded in some shape or form, right?
Yeah.
So again, I at a very early age, or not early age, early point of working in this area of work, understand that peer pressure is a major. Sometimes we lose sight of how important that is, because as a young person, sometimes that's all you have,
Yeah.
to fit in with your peers. Yeah. um, Victims, people, people who have been exposed to sort of like attacks. You give an example, a young person who's been through a knife wounding will end up probably carrying one himself, or end up going out there and fighting or arming somebody themselves, just out of pure anger. I mean, you remember that conversation what Liam Nielsen had about one of his familiars, his friends, got attacked, and he was going out the next night looking for somebody what looked like that person.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah. And so
that
the
victim with that
conversation
issue.
around, so the vicarious
So,
trauma.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you see, if you look at the sort of the contributory factors to what leads to vulnerability, I certainly I always have that conversation, because you see what it is. This model can be used against all sorts of different areas of work, but at the same time, this is predominantly focused on what we have to think about around individuals who have been impacted by extremism, or been influenced to be radicalized. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, beyond that, you've got your vulnerability factors. The next slide will give you another conversation around some of the behaviors which you could certainly associate with that. Yeah. Sometimes people say to me, so, well, actually, every young person has a right to sort of express themselves when they want to. And I've worked with some really difficult ones, the ones that just keep the hoodie on, they won't lift their head off the table. But, that usually tells me that there's something they want to say, but it's just that we haven't given them the right environment to say it within. Yeah. But some of the behaviors that we certainly look at, especially in the world of work I'm doing now, which is a lot of it is learned from work I've done previously in Prevent. Yeah, we start looking at some of the behaviors. People, young people will start using symbols. Some of them will use a tattoo. You might see the swastika. You might see them start using different emblems. You might see them using numbers. They get fixated on subjects. They're always correct and right about that subject. Right? Not saying that they shouldn't, but sometimes they need challenging on that, or express or explore or delve into why are they thinking and saying these things. Another behavior, what we look at, like uncharacteristic changes. Yeah. when we started doing this prevent work, we had some professionals looking at uncharacteristic traces or changes of appearance as a means to make a referral, like young Muslim girl coming to school, one week, very westernizing their appearance. The next week, she's on a dean. They didn't understand that, or she just started to change a little. I started asking questions like, is there any facility to pray? And they're making referrals into prevent. So we had to sort of change even how some of our practitioners thought about this, because again, I'm not saying it's unconscious bias, but I would say there's a level of bias there because you lack the understanding of why she's doing that, and the way they would have learned that is through conversation. It didn't have to get to us before the conversation occurred. Now, if the conversation had occurred and something had come out of it, that'd be a different thing.
I hear you. So just because someone gravitating towards spirituality overtly, that's not necessarily a sign of them becoming radicalized.
No. It's just their expression of showing you this is who I am now. That a lot of people have done that throughout time. Punk rockers done it. But we didn't. Well, actually, when punk rockers did do it, they were nearly classified as enemies of the state.
Okay.
But there was no counterterrorism laws at that point for them.
Okay. Yeah. So in terms of some of the vulnerabilities, let's do a quick case study. So family upheaval.
Yeah.
On the right here, father left, relationship with mother. Yeah.
Yeah. So you see, when we was talking about that, right? What we usually do, we played some an actual case study video, yeah. And in that video, it sort of set a kind of a theme or provided a kind of a nuance around what was actually going on for that individual, right? And in that conversation, we're getting practitioners to think about what they've seen from that, right? And if you play the next slide, you'll see in that conversation the kind of things what we talked about. Familiar as what they would know about when they work with the individual and what they should be really considering. Because again, we do the work, we do the assessment, and sometimes we're looking for the sort of start, finish, and end. And we're not looking into what is really going on within that family. And you see, when we list reasons, you see, father left home. A lot of families live in single parents. We're not saying that's a massive issue for why they're disaffected or being led down a road, but we do know that it does have if a father's not there, it can be treated like a sense of bereavement, right? Because you've lost an individual.
Definitely. We've done all the research around father deficit, and we have to be unapologetic around the idea that we see all the conversation around ACEs. One of the ACEs is around divorce, separation, and bereavement.
Yeah, absolutely. You've touched it on the head, because you see a lot of what I talk about as well. I certainly have an underpinning of ACEs around the work we do as well. Because we do recognize that adverse childhood experience really does have an impact. Yeah.
Just for those who are listening who wouldn't know what ACEs is, could you just explain it to it in a very compressed way?
Yeah, it's adverse childhood experiences where young people experience trauma, which can have lasting impact on their development and their future growth. Okay. Right. And it could be from substance abuse, mental health, all sorts of different issues. But there's a list of ACEs. But some of these traumatic experiences, as much as we've got resilience within us, can have a lasting. In fact, it can have an impact on your life dependency as well, and the length of time you can live. So there's a lot of research. If you're really interested, just do a quick Google or YouTube, and you'll get a lot of learning around ACEs. And I think it's an eye opener for parents. It's not telling you're a bad parent, but it's just giving you an eye opener around the sort of how trauma can resonate throughout your life.
Well, what it would hopefully do, stop parents from arguing in front of the children.
I'm telling you.
Hopefully that will help, at least that.
Yeah, absolutely. As a minute. Yeah.
So you go through this, and let me just, because I'm just conscious of time.
And you see, this is another case study, right, where we looked at another set of young people. So the first case study was certainly talking about a young person what was gravitating towards Islamic extremism, or Islamic inspired extremism, and this one was gravitating towards extreme far right. As you can see, he had a lack of understanding of the culture. He was sort of going around having conversations with guys older than himself, wanting to fit in. Get to the age of 15, you want to get to a football ground. You're meeting lads like that. They call you over. All that bravado was going on. Then he was getting into some of the video games, experiencing violence, becoming very tolerant to violence, and becoming sort of like an individual what didn't recognize the impact violence would have if it was propagated. Yeah. He was in a place where his parents and his family thought he was safe, i.e. in the bedroom. Yeah. Most parents would have told you that in the bedroom is the safest place for my child to be because of all the different risks what are associated with being outside the home. But again, spending a lot of time in your bedroom unsupervised can be more detrimental than actually going out on street. Because again, you're inviting somebody into your presence or into your space, which could never walk through your front door.
Well, right? correct me if I'm wrong. Those young ladies that got radicalized from Bethnal Green, it was it was online in their bedrooms, right?
Absolutely, and nobody actually recognized that, right? And look at the fallout of that now. We're still waiting, one of the girls, she won her appeal in it, so she might be coming back here very soon to have a conversation around that. And she's one of many. She's not the only person. She's one of many, but on arrival, it will be due diligence to law, and whatever needs to be done in respect to that, in terms of looking at her vulnerability, looking at her risk, looking at whether there's any crimes being committed, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong though, but prior to that, they were high achieving young girls at school, right?
Yeah.
They weren't overtly religious, and you know what I'm saying when I'm saying that.
Absolutely. But you see, the way the law sets now is that if there's a land that's been prescribed as a prescribed region or prescribed area, travel to that place or that region or affiliation to an organization that's been prescribed renders you as committing an offense.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, that has to be tested through the courts. And if convicted, you have to do whatever time they've suggested or whatever, and that's the way it is. Some might argue it's draconian and it's not the right way to go about things, especially for a young person like that. But again, something had to be done around trying to mitigate the potential of individuals who had shown open affiliation or open allegiance to terrorist organizations or terrorist outfits, and how you try and stem the flow or the growth of that. Yeah, and I think some would argue law or legalities is not the right way, but we do have to have legalities in everything in life. You have to have a stock and check and balance and check in place somewhere.
Of course. Well, I'm looking at some of the conversations we speak in the chat rooms, and people are saying that for example, opening up the opportunity to have these discussions is so important, because
absolutely.
We know the nature of young people is that they're curious. So they might see something on the news, and then in their bedroom, they Google it or they go onto a website, and all of a sudden they're in this world, they're in the dark web, they're in this world.
Man, I'm glad you brought this up, Ryan, because it's really important. You said this, absolutely important, because you know what it is? We're playing catch up. When you think about the guys who are out there sort of with their remote servers promoting, I say, extremist messages, message of hate, inappropriate messages, grooming, exploitation, sexual exploitation. You got stars, drilling all day long, influencing young people to engage in, crime. We're playing catch up, and the catch up really is that you need more of these conversations, opportunities to have conversations with young people to explore and challenge some of what they're seeing, because a lot of it is fake. Some of it is staged. Young people believe it. Sometimes we do workshops with young people, and you're telling them your truth, yeah, and you're telling them your facts. And I'll openly say to you, look, mate, I'll be honest, man. I hear what you're saying, but I'm gonna go and have to check Google.
Yeah,
that's their truth, that's their reality. And it's teachers have to deal with that every day of the week.
Yeah,
young people are developing their own sort of knowledge base, and some of that is going unchallenged.
This is it. The challenge of social media is I think people know it, but if you look at, and I'll task anyone who's tuning in today, if you've got an iPhone, especially, pull up the indicator of how much time you spent on social media in the last 7 days.
I have got that thing registered on my app, and I laugh. You
Listen,
know?
and you adults listening in today, look how much you spent on WhatsApp. At least on average, the average person spends 1 day a week on WhatsApp in total, because every message that you respond to, every group that you're in, this is, and people actually forget, Colvin, WhatsApp is social media.
Yes. I have that same conversation. They go like this. I don't do Facebook. I don't do Snapchat. I don't do none of them online things. And I go, have you got WhatsApp? Yeah, I've got WhatsApp. And I said, what do you think WhatsApp is?
Exactly. Else certain platform wouldn't have bought it. So cool. So let's just skip on. So in terms of the risk.
Yeah. So you see what we're saying there in terms of radicalization, anybody can become vulnerable to radicalization, because remember, it's just having a cognitive opening. Somebody's talked to you about something, and you're attuned to it, and you think you actually agree with that. Yeah, you might not even be radicalized. You might not even have a view. You might not even have a political view in your body, but you've agreed to a certain thing, and then that person realizes that's probably their opening or their opportunity now to provide some influences around for you to continue thinking that way, to the point, right, where you might be asked to make a difference. But the things that we always sort of look at, is vulnerability doesn't always lead to radicalization, which it doesn't. I've been doing this work a long time before the conversation around radicalization exists, but people have always been vulnerable. Yeah. We do know that if there's a sense of injustice, which I've experienced, a lot of people experience in my genre, in terms of our age. We were growing up in a time when we thought that, right, just for the color of our skin meant you had to be criminalized by the time you was 18. So a lot of people my age group, I've got records, all of them minor and all silly things, but it's what it is. So a lot of that generation have definitely got this sense of injustice. Yeah. But we all have these feelings, so we've got to do something, right? But whatever we've got to do, we have to recognize that it's got to be proportionate, right? We can't be running in sort of accusing people of things which doesn't exist. Just for instance, like in my world of Prevent, we get a lot of referrals where people have made the assumption that this person's been radicalized because of what they've said, what they've worn, what they've behaved like. And I'm glad that we've got a process by which we look at these things in more of a scrutiny through multi-agency, and we can make quick decisions around whether it is or not. And if we do, it's still in that Prevent space. We're not looking at criminalizing the individuals around, working with that individual to understand why they're aggrieved by a set of things, or if there's anything we can do to sort of reduce that grievance which has led to the vulnerability, if I could say that.
Yeah, totally. So let me just go forward a little bit. So what does it look like? You're talking about some of the vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So people becoming short-tempered, angry, bitter, and newfound arrogance. And when I'm going through this, I'm seeing a lot of the similarities, what we used to see around young people entering gangs.
Absolutely. Where do you think I got all of this from? This is my transition from gangs work into this work was just seamless. It was something I felt I had to do. You know what I'm saying? Because I was working with youngsters, right, which were all gang affiliated, right? Some of them are nominals coming through. And the issue what I kind of saw was that at first it was like really good. I saw a lot of my youngsters sort of like embracing religion, right? Well, going to why, but I thought it was a brilliant thing. It would move them away from violence, would move them away from all that sort of thing. But what I was realizing, right, it wasn't that they were moving away. It was that some of them were being, I would say, indoctrinated by a particular viewpoint. So it wasn't like they were going to a good imam or a mosque and listening to people talking. They were just sort of listening to a guy who had very, very loose understanding of religion, as his way of control. And I thought, this can't be right. And, the work we started, and then you see, what I did see was within the gangs space, a lot of the young people were sort of like really sort of engaged in violence, were moving away from the I would say network of the sort of like street gang, and we're getting more together in different groups. And I thought, well, if that was the situation, that group can't exist or
Yeah.
develop in a way with false information. If they're gonna grow, they're gonna grow positively and strong in a particular way. Now, some people that argue said you're gone mad and you're trying to sort of strengthen gangs. I was actually no, I'm not strengthening gangs. I was actually looking at the young people of all these. They've gone on deeds. They started to group together. They started to think about their spirit. They started to think about their identity, and all they needed was good guidance within that.
Yeah. Good
Yeah,
mentor.
that's where like people like yourself came into that space, Raymond. Certainly had conversations with a lot of them guys at that time around their belief. What the direction that we're going in. What's the legacy they're going to leave. What's the legacy for your child you're going to leave. What are you really actually saying? Because again, a lot of the issues what we learned around gangs was about short-lived profits, right? And it wasn't about sustaining long term, even though they used to always talk about that. The reality is it couldn't do that. Mm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So let me like hear from a Birmingham's perspective here.
Yes.
Let's go through these kind of interventions. So
Right.
start with number one. Do you want to break that down for the
Yeah.
viewer?
So what we say in our prevent space is that you can't run in and start indoctrinating people. What you have to do is the program itself or the work you have to do has got to be, it's got to have an educative element, right? So therefore, you're in your lesson with your young person, you're given the opportunity to have a conversation about a particular subject. For instance, you're in a history class and you start talking about Palestine, and then a young person who's brought up in Palestine or got heritage from Palestine, you start shooting them down in the class. How dare you support that regime? How dare you support whatever? But they didn't recognize that child has got Palestinian heritage. So all of a sudden, that child's in a space now where they're feeling disaffection by the actual learner, the teacher there. And so you see, all of that kind of conversation we have in terms of in Birmingham, we work with schools around how they can develop curriculum centered activities where young people have the opportunity to have a conversation. We work with partners, some of them grassroots, are certainly going and have that conversation with young people as well. Because it creates a different buzz when sometimes you bring in external partners to have that conversation and can get down to the level of where the children are in terms of their understanding and their knowledge or notion of what their subject matter is. So education is very important because a lot of young people spend a lot of time in education. If you think about a day a young person is awake in a year, you're going to get 36 weeks of that year they're going to be in school.
Yeah.
Of that week, they're going to get sort of like 6-7 hours a day of education. So again, it's really important that we provide the opportunity for schools to be able to provide that safe space and provide that level of intervention, what would allow young people to speak and talk about things that are impacting on them. Then we talk about the diversionary aspect to it. That's where we work with some of our youth groups, some of our community-based organizations, anyone really which can actually provide some opportunity for a young person to disengage from a particular influence or an attachment, by providing good attachments. So, for instance, a young person who's been, groomed by individual to follow a particular, form of practice or religion or whatever, we certainly try and get them into the space where we divert them into a more positive environment where they can get that learning. Where it's not, covert and hidden, and they're sort of coming with certain views. For instance, like our young ladies, radicalizing their bedroom, travel to Syria. If at the time we knew what we knew now, certainly would have provided some diversion activity so that they weren't spending all that time in their bedrooms online, just talking to people in a virtual world. The inclusion part of it now, really important. We've seen it done in the past where we used to do all these we used to put on little food events, putting on community inclusion events where people come in and experience different foods, have a good eat up and then disappear. But I think nowadays we're looking at it more developed now, because inclusion has got to incorporate young people into a way of thinking where they're actually learning through cognitive practices around what other communities are doing, right?
Yeah.
Because again, it's all right reading in a book what your neighbour's about, but if you're not going to play cricket with him or football with him, you might not understand who they are.
Or even have
Yeah,
a safe space to debate with them.
exactly. So all the inclusion, we see inclusion as a main facet, because again, young people who could be impacted by some of these sort of negative and extremist notions or narratives could benefit or have benefited from inclusion. We've done, I've seen it actually work, where a young person had a particular viewpoint about a certain community. And when they started to sort of work with individuals from that community, they understood, it just became very apparent that all the stuff that we was learning before didn't make no sense, because what you found out through the inclusion work, they were exactly the same. They wanted the same things. You couldn't really actually wrong them for who they were. And, it was, we could have spent a lot of weeks in one-to-one sessions trying to get him to change his viewpoint. But a few weeks in that center with working with a different group of people brought that change around a lot quicker.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these brave spaces,
yes,
not even safe spaces, these brave spaces are so important. So
absolutely.
The challenging narrative is kind of like, so I can see that's your community-centered approach, where organizations, individuals, multi-agency come together to offer a pushback. Is that what we're saying?
Absolutely. Offer a pushback and offer a different direction. Right. You see, for instance, I've seen projects, for instance, like minus violence. Sometimes people think about that program as just all about gangs, but it isn't. Young people get to understand the true nature and the impact of violence, and that's more important. That's a resilience. People don't. You can tell somebody to stop doing something, but when you understand the impact, if a knife cuts you here, how does it feel? What's the trauma from that? Then getting a better understanding gives them more, and it's made a difference, and it will continue to make a difference.
And do you think there's mileage in having unsugar-coated, unapologetic, honest conversations with young people?
It is. I'm telling you now, because right then, just put on TikTok, right? Put on Snapchat. Look at the kind of images they're watching now, right? Sometimes you have to have things hard hitting to get people to listen. It's. I think we've passed the mollycoddle kind of society norms with young people now, because a lot more young people are more informed, more intelligent, and more inquisitive. So we have to be hard hitting now. You've seen this where we used to do work with the gangs. At the beginning, we used to walk in there, everybody told us to be nice, and then we almost had to start to become parents, but like good parent, bad parents, just to get people to understand where we were, and that boundaries are important. Because again, what we realized in that work, boundaries are so important for young people.
Massively.
If they don't have them, they're just running free. But the second they got boundaries, got something to start live by, or something to start to follow by, and it provides that structure. And everybody wants that structure.
Yeah, I totally agree. So let me just go forward. So a strength-based approach. I'm looking before. So there's a quote that you've got here.
Yeah.
While traditional models of assessments have tended to focus on deficit and problem identification, the strengths perspective focuses on client strengths and abilities. According to social work theory, Salibi, operating from a strengths-based perspective means that everything you do as a helper, carer, caregiver, practitioner will be based on facilitating the discovery and acknowledgement, exploration and use of client strengths and resources in the service of helping them achieve their dreams. So what you're saying is, what I'm getting from that is that every individual is different, and first you've got to, their weaknesses, but you've got to extrapolate their strengths and build on them. Is that what you're saying here?
Absolutely, exactly what I'm trying to say. If I was to give you a scenario now, I used to sit in lots of reviews, where practitioners would sit down and give their update on the work they'd be doing with a family. And some of these reviews, I'd be sitting in a review, and I swear this is no word of a lie. I'd listen to a practitioner probably read off 40 or 50 different things they got
Yeah.
problems with, right? And I'd
Yeah.
be sitting down in the room thinking to myself, is there nothing good you could say about this family?
Mm.
You understand me? You know, there's got to be at least one thing you got to say, and you can see there's a tone. And I was saying, and then I remember I was having a chat with a guy who actually wrote that, Dr. Tony Stanley. He used to be he was our lead social worker in Birmingham before he actually left, yeah. And he's done a few research for Prevent as well as other social work research, yeah. And we had that same conversation about how sometimes people lose sight of the fact that if you celebrate one thing, people start to feel a little happier.
Yeah.
You know, if there's like 100 things going about me wrong, and you come in and tell me the one thing about me what was good, I might start to feel better. It might even outweigh my 100, right? But you see, I think sometimes practitioners lose sight of the fact that strengths are important. You know, when we talk about strengths-based approach, it's not even sometimes just the individual. They could have family members there. They could have
Yeah.
other, they could have people close to them, which is a strength which we need to sort of work on. Many times, we talk to parents who have been through some really horrendous situations, yeah, and all they can see is the negative. Right now, when you're in a review and you're talking about an update, and you says, "Well, actually, this is what they haven't done. This is what I wanted them to do, and they haven't done that. And this is what I wanted to do, and they haven't done that." It's kind of demoralizing for the individual because sometimes those individuals are finding it difficult just to get up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? You celebrate the fact that brilliant, you've got up today, fantastic. Anything around celebrating strengths is important, and I think in terms of practice around social work, it's actually improved the way we think because it is a way of work now where we actually certainly have to look at the strengths within an individual as well as the vulnerabilities and risks.
So not on this deficit model thing, but
No.
championing the good that's been done.
Yes.
Excellent. Colvin, you know what? We're approaching the hour.
I'm not finished already. I thought I'd be here sweating myself off here, Raymond.
You know what? You've added so much value today. I'm going to give you some of the comments that have come out on the chat. Some people said this conversation is really important. They've also commented and said that someone said they're advocate for play, and what you're saying for me is about getting young people to play in different spaces.
I agree. Use play as an intervention resource. It absolutely is the best resource out there. We talk about intervention, and one of the things we always talk about is signs of safety, right? And really, you can create the environment through the process of signs of safety, and it affords the practitioner and the young person or the parent to talk, have conversations about things what are worrying them, things what they want to see change. And that's the kind of things we always say, create that. And play is a good resource to do that within. Yeah.
Definitely. And we've also got some other comments here around education should be tailored around the child, young person, not the system. Interesting opinion there. And someone said that a strength-based solution focused. Excellent. So look, I'm gonna draw that to a close, and we could be reasoning right up into the night. But I want to ask you 3 questions before you go. Which all my guests have to start answering. So it's called 3Ds. So what's your favorite dish in terms of food?
My favorite dish, right, is gotta be callaloo and saltfish.
Okay, white rice.
Yeah, with white rice, definitely. Gotta blend it with the white rice. Yep.
Okay. Second question is, what's your favorite destination? Because we were talking before we went live about if we could, we'd be out of here.
I must admit, right, my favorite destination is definitely Jamaica, right? But I'm telling you, I've fallen in love with the Med. I don't know what it is about the Mediterranean, man. Them islands are just doing me, man. It feels like I'm in the Jamaica place sometimes.
Okay, wicked, excellent. So, finally, what's your dream? What's your dream? What in terms of work around you?
You might find this a bit corny, right? But since lockdown, right, as you can see, I've been growing a beard.
Yeah.
And everybody's been asking me, right? Come on, Colvin, man. You're a sharp guy. You always got your little tie on. You always got your nice little sharp cuts in it. And I've been telling them all, I'm not cutting my beard until there's world peace. And my kids, all of them are vexed with me now, because it's like every time I look on the news, there's still stuff going on. But I might cut it before, right? But if there was world peace, I'd be a happy man.
Well, you know what?
That would be my thing, because I worry about the next generation and I
Yeah.
worry about all the conflicts I've seen, and some of it are becoming so minute in terms of what's causing it. And if you think about our environment where we are now, and you see the escalation of violence with young people for sometimes just a stare.
Mm.
Uh, and if our society, as a global society, don't start looking at how we deal with conflict or deal with issues that are impacting us, we're going to just transcend into something really, really negative in the next 50 years, I think. And things need to change.
I hear you. So your favorite dish, callaloo, saltfish over white rice.
Yeah.
Your favorite destination is the
I did say
Mediterranean.
Jamaica, but I did say I love the Med. I love the Med. If I had the money, I'd buy a villa down there now.
Okay, all right. And you're not. The third dream is that world peace. But you know
Yeah.
what? In cutting your beard, my little one asked me why don't I cut it, and I said a lion doesn't cut their mane. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Colvin, listen, you've
Thank
added
you.
value this evening. Thank you, King. Yeah.
I value being here as well, Raymond. I trust me, man.
Thank you, sir. And people are messaging that they want to get hold of you, so I'm going to forward, give them your contact.
Yeah, man. Give them a contact. We're here, man. We're here to help.
I'd love to get you on the show again, and we'll talk about.
Absolutely, we can talk about another subject. We can. We need to sort of platforms like this are really important,
Definitely.
right? And our generation, we're not the young whippersnappers that we were, and we've got a lot to contribute still, right? So this is an opportunity, and I'm very thankful and grateful for it, Raymond.
Respect, King. Yeah. Stay blessed. Peace.
Yeah, you.